everybody. I'd like to say a few words about the Standard of Ur, which is an early example of a sophisticated work of art. And it was found in the city of Ur, and we're talking early, this is the 3rd millennium, and this is, the era of Sumer, so ancient Near Eastern or Mesopotamian. The archaeologists discovered not only a city, but also this royal cemetery where you have several large underground tombs where important people, whether they were royal or not, we're not really sure, but they were buried with goodies and also executed people who apparently would have been slaves for them in the afterlife. Now, human sacrifice was later abandoned by ancient Near Eastern cultures. Here's the tomb where the Standard of Ur was discovered, tomb 779, and you can see it's got 4 rooms. Here's the entrance. This is where the standard was discovered. It was also discovered near the corpse of somebody who had been killed. Perhaps that person was supposed to carry this object. And here it is, the Standard of Ur. We don't know exactly what it was, how it was supposed to be displayed. One theory is that it would have been carried around on a pole like a standard. A standard is something that's carried around usually in a military battlefield, but or it can be in a religious parade, but it's usually a banner or some sort of object that's carried aloft. So they think that this could have been carried aloft, or it could have just been displayed in somebody's home or a palace. As you can see, it's quite old. And what is it? Well, it's not made of stone. It looks like it's solid stone. It's not. It's a wooden box. And all along the outside, you have this mosaic. You have these affixed pieces of shell and also lapis lazuli. And obviously, there's going to be, it's decorated all around it. So you've got two big sides. So we'll start with this side. This is known as the war side. And before I say anything else, let me unpack this idea of lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli comes from a long ways away, and that is Afghanistan, which is over here, north of modern-day Iran, or over here. And it's it came from far away, and that's where the lapis lazuli comes from. It's the semi-precious stone. It's very expensive. Both the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians will use it extensively in their art. And by the Renaissance, they'll be making color from it. By the Gothic age, they'll be making paint from it called ultramarine blue. So it's this rich, dark blue. It looks like it's really big. I was surprised when I saw this in person at the British Museum because it's actually not that big. It's 8 inches tall and 1 foot 7 inches long. And it's here. So here's the war side. And while I'm on the topic of style, let me say a few more things about style. You've got this, the object, or the people and objects are depicted in what are called registers. These 3 levels, sometimes they're called friezes. And this allows for narrative art like this to be clearly displayed. And you're supposed to read it from left to right, starting at the bottom and then going up like that. In terms of function, what was its primary intended use? We don't really know. Obviously, it's a work of propaganda, but exactly where it was supposed to be displayed, we're not sure. But we are sure that it's propaganda. This work tells us about this guy. He's depicted twice, on this side and on the other. We have hierarchy of scale here. He is larger than everybody else. Also, in terms of style, notice that we have a 2-dimensional work of art, and there is no illusion of depth. That is to say, there's no perspective. There's no, on a 2-dimensional work of art, when you have the illusion of depth, it's called perspective. And in this case, we don't really have perspective of any consistency. Now, there are some examples. If you had a sharp eye, you would have noticed that these horses, they look like they're all lined up. And, because obviously horses don't have I don't know how many, 16 legs like this. So it looks like one horse is standing in front of another. You've got 4 in a row. That would be an example of perspective. It's kind of clumsy. It's not very convincing, but they are trying to tell us that there are more horses behind this one horse. So there is a little bit of perspective. But other than that, most all the other objects and people are pushed up to the foreground, and there's not a lot of overlap. The figures are not what we would describe as naturalistic or even realistic. I might like to use a term that's not very technical, but it's cartoonish. I would describe these figures as cartoonish. And what I mean by that is that they're simplified and expressive. So we really get to see, we can tell that these are figures, we can tell that they're people, but they don't have a lot of realistic detail. There isn't an effort to depict musculature and even make the figures look very different from one another. It doesn't really matter with this work, as long as you can tell what's going on, as long as you can see that this guy is victorious and that he's, smiting the enemy. And we've got, here the prisoners of war have been stripped naked and they're brought before him. So that's a little bit on style. Subject matter, we've got on one side, we have a battle scene or a war scene and after a battle scene. And on the other side, we have what's called the peace side. So there's a banquet. What they think is that this is probably depicting a king. And this shows the 2 sides of kingship at the time, that a king was expected to be a powerful warrior, to smite the enemy and protect their people from outside invasion. The other role of a king, which you can see on the other side, the peace side, is an adept administrator in times of peace. So they're able to keep the peace and allow for prosperity. This will include later on law codes so that everybody knows what's expected of their behavior. So this can prevent squabbles and potential civil war. And people will have a sense that there's an order to society. With the war side, we have this the battle going on. We've got chariots with horses being pulled. But we do have these vicious battle scenes with corpses down here. If you watched my video on ancient Near Eastern and Egyptian art, you know that I talked about the stele of Naram Sin, and how I talked about it was one of the first great examples of the use of images of death for political propaganda. Well, this one also uses some images of death with corpses down here and this poor guy over here. Then we have, it's really about domination, dominating your enemies, being able to take your prisoner of war, strip them naked, humiliate them, whip them, kill them, and bring them before the victor. Of course, they're really enslaving these prisoners of war. And then you have the peace side. We've got provisions being brought, livestock and grains and goodies. Here they are still being brought. And then up above, we've got this banquet scene. So who doesn't love a wonderful banquet? There's the king. He's got a cup. You can tell these are men. They're all shirtless and they're wearing these long skirts. That's what they wore back at that time. And what's a party without a boombox? Over here, we've got a lyre, and we have apparently the singer over here, somebody with long hair. Most of the men have shaved heads, which I find interesting. That must have been the style for the day. It may have been coincidental, but also Egyptians shaved their heads and wore wigs, and that may have partly had to do with controlling body lice. So we have a vision from the 3rd millennium BCE of a successful and happy king presiding over peace after war, you could say, and enjoying his cup there. The Mesopotamians brewed beer and enjoyed alcohol, so they're having a good time. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting and helpful, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.